So for those that don't know, this starch to veggie ratio or plate concept is simply just a model that helps you assemble a plant-based meal that is sufficient for weight loss. In a sense, it is simply a visual guide with the basic premise being, right, let's divide your plate, in your mind's eye, your ideal plate of food, into starches. In other words, our carbohydrate-rich, quite obviously starchy staples, the likes of potatoes and whole grains, of course legumes such as beans, peas and lentils, and then of course vegetables. However, what I should stress here is that vegetables and fruit, very, very interchangeable in this regard. I mean, breakfast is a great example. It's very unlikely that you're willing and happy to have veggies for breakfast, and so we can use this sort of starch to veggie ratio idea with the likes of your morning oatmeal too, but it would be more starch to fruit ratio. Do you see what I mean? But that's the basic premise anyway. That's the basic outline. So it's a food model, and whilst there are sort of comparable tools and structures under other diet spectrums, in my mind, I think really this is quite exclusive to the sort of vegan and plant-based scene. What's happened, therefore, is that you hear this a lot as a sort of weight loss plateau hacking strategy, and I have some serious problems with it, and I'm going to share with you my two biggest issues with this starch to veggie ratio concept today. And I'll round off by summing up actually here and circling back to the idea that whilst I like this concept and it has some merit, it's inherently flawed, and it is put up on this pedestal, again, in the sort of vegan plant-based space, as one of the only things you can do to get through a plateau, and I really, really want to dissect just how false that is. So perhaps let's start there. There are lots of things you can do right now. If you don't realise this, I've been weight loss coaching for several years now. In 2020, we had 100 vegans and plant-based dieters lose their first 10, 20 and 30 pounds in my Vegan Slim and Sustain coaching program. So those are my credentials right there to get that out the way. But there are lots of things you can do to break plateaus in my experience. An awful amount. It isn't just that you have to go to this starch to veggie ratio. Now, I will admit, it is one brilliant method, and it does have utility, and I do cover this in my coaching program, and there are some people that I recommend when I do a bit of a diet diagnosis with them, that perhaps they do need to tinker with their starch to veggie ratios. Again, it's really valid as a tool for breaking through plateaus and helping weight loss get moving, getting the needle moving. However, there's a lot of things you can do. Inter-food group modification is one great example. It's not just that you have to tinker with the starch to veggie ratio every time you hit a plateau. You can actually keep starch and veggies the exact same, but change the types of starch and veggies, the types of starches and veggies you're using. And this can be enough to elicit the calorie change, the increase in fiber that you were perhaps missing. And this can help you again progress further with weight loss. So again, nuance, detail. I talk about this all the time. You've got to get away from this binary thinking with weight loss, where it's like, okay, I'm not losing weight, I've got to lower starch. It's like, well, yeah, maybe there might be validity to doing that, but let's also talk about the type of starch you're having. And this is a concept I talk about, again, in my coaching program, but actually it's more of an advanced strategy for weight loss. I think this is perhaps more appropriate for people with the last 10 to 15 pounds to lose. But the basic idea here, once again, is inter-food group modification. So rather than just playing the food groups off one another, like with starches to veggies and whatnot, even though starch is not even a food group. That's how reductive and simple this is. Starches, they're not even a food group. Okay, they break down into several food groups. But anyway, that's a different qualm entirely. But inter-food group modification, the premise being you keep the food groups the same, but you do a little bit of tinkering amongst the food groups because some whole grains are better than others for weight loss. Some tubers are better than others for weight loss. Some veggies are better than others for weight loss in terms of the likes of calorie density, fiber content, fat content, protein, although that can go both ways, so that's a bit tricky. Vitamin and mineral profile, water richness, there's a bunch of other things as well, but they're the big ones. So yeah, there's a lot of nuance and detail here that the sort of 50-50 starch to veggie plate idea really does ignore, and I don't like that. Exercise is another huge way to break plateaus. You don't just have to keep lowering your starch. It might be, if you're not doing any exercise right now, you've got to get the body moving, or it might be that you're doing lots of walking and yoga right now. Brilliant, I commend you. But by increasing the intensity of your workouts and trying something like cycling, swimming, martial arts, team sports, something that increases heart rate, increases calorie burn, also builds your fitness as well. That's really important for general general health and well-being. This can be enough to break you through without you having to bring your starch down and lower the calories even further. Fat calories, this is another way to break plateaus. Lots of vegans and plant-based dieters right now having lots of nut butters, nut seeds, avocados, tofu, tempeh. Please note, I am not anti these things. Absolutely not. But there are some people that have such a high percentage of their calories coming from these foods, and fat is the least slimming of the big three macronutrients for weight loss. Now, granted, this doesn't make too much of a difference if you're in a calorie deficit. We're talking about fine margins here, but again, it can be enough to break you through. You can also look, if you're struggling with plateaus right now, at your calorie distribution over the course of a day. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole here. Meal scheduling. Basically, whilst I'm not teaching you how to execute these things today, I'm going to talk about other resources later where you can go to learn some of this stuff on my YouTube channel, so stay with me. I'm not going in depth on these things today. What I'm doing is outlining how many other options you have, because there are so many vegans and plant-based dieters, as I say. Let me know in the comments if you're one of these that just assume, because they've heard it so many times from other influencers. I don't like that term, influencers, but as you can probably tell with the wincing on my face as I said it, but you know, this is just constantly rebounded. I really feel as though it's put up on a pedestal, and I think it's overvalued. Again, I want to stress, I think it's a really good tool for hacking plateaus and helping people break through with weight loss and giving them a visual guide. But this idea that you always have to sort of automatically go to the 50-50 plate, and then from there you lower. I mean, ultimately, you can keep going with that, but you're going to be eating like a 90% veggie or fruit plate in the end just to keep weight loss going. You could be at risk of radically undereating. And maybe that is a nice segue into my second criticism of this food model. For some people, the 50-50 plate, it's wholly inappropriate. The obvious example of this is when you take calories so low, because such a large percentage of your diet is fruit and veggies. And there are lots of new vegans and plant-based dieters, especially beginners, that make the real mistake of undereating when they make the switch, because so many of these foods have a low calorie density, have a high fiber content, etc., which brings the calorie density, as I say, down, right? And they're so filling, satisfying, because of, again, the nutrient richness of these foods, fiber being a great example. So you can get very full with this diet for very few calories comparatively compared to other diets, and certainly, you know, a standard westernized diet. So a lot of people have to be very wary of this anyway. So if they are going vegan or plant-based, they might already be running the very real risk of undereating. And then further, yeah, if they really embody and implement, that's probably the word I'm looking for, implement this starch to veggie ratio, I mean, how low are their calories going to go if they're constantly insisting on always having a 50-50 plate? Make sense? So it can be wholly inappropriate. For some people, it can be near on dangerous. And for some people, really, the ideal amount of starch might be roughly 70% of their plate. It might be 80% of their plate. For me, sometimes my starch content, and you shouldn't model on what I'm doing because I'm in a weight maintenance phase if you're personally looking to lose weight right now, but just to give you full, context on this and show you the breadth of this discussion, or the breadth that this discussion needs to have, rather than just 50-50 plate. It's so reductive, as I say. But for me, I'm like sometimes 90% starch if I'm having a very, very active day. I'm also mindful that I certainly don't want to lose any more weight right now. I'm very happy with where I'm at. Does that make sense? So for some people, it can be that their starch to veggie ratio needs to be much higher than what is typically advised, in this sort of starch to veggie plate breakdown, which is usually 50-50. You hear some people talking about 60-40, which I'm more on board with. And again, it depends where you're at. It depends what you're eating. Depends how much of those foods you're eating as well, okay? Let's talk about calories, which no vegan or plant-based dieting sort of influencer seems to be that happy to talk about nowadays, sadly. But calories matter too. So yeah, you could have a nice breakdown of your plate visually. You could adhere to the 50-50 plate, but you could still be well overeating, right? And that's going to take your calories over. It's going to stop you with weight loss. Perhaps it even goes the other way. So for many people, this is too generalized. It's wholly inappropriate. And it just makes me wince so much when I hear people talking about this so generally. It's really, really not appropriate advice to sit on a YouTube video, I would suggest, and say, go to a 50-50 plate and tell 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 people that simple soundbite without explaining all the exceptions and the caveats like I'm trying to do here right now, okay? I'm mentioning that this is a tool. I'm talking about other potential tools to help you continue weight loss, but I'm not saying that you should definitely do this that clearly. And I literally do hear other, as I say, influencers, hate it, cringe, say that sort of thing, and I think it's wholly inappropriate. I think it's very risky, and as I say, it makes me wince and cringe when I hear that. So ultimately here, in conclusion, the starch to veggie ratio, I do like it. I do like this model. It's very simplistic. What about fat? right? What about protein intake? The starch to veggie ratio doesn't even consider those things too. Do you see what I mean? It's so simple. In fact, the more I talk about it, the more I think about it, the more I detest it. No, I don't detest it. Again, it's a useful tool, but do you see how simple it is? I think it's really helpful visual guide for beginners, but beyond that, there's so much more to weight loss, there's so much more context required, and ultimately, rather than you just learning from other YouTubers or your coach or medical doctors, I hope that my audience goes and learns for themselves. And I hope you guys consider things like calorie density, fiber. You don't have to learn all about these things in time. You don't have to know that buckwheat has a lower calorie density than brown rice. You don't have to know that off the top of your head right now. But to get to the stage where you can think, okay, dates, higher calorie density than peaches. Okay, peaches or strawberries around 90% water content, so they probably have less calories than so-and-so fruit, for instance, mango, for instance. And then to jump online and just double check if that's actually true. It is true. But to just double check that. That's where I want you guys to be going. I want you to be learning the semantics and the nuances in time, advancing your knowledge with nutrition, so you can do this for yourself rather than relying on a simple visual cue like the Starch to Veggie plate guide. As much as it is useful for beginners, I think it's very reductive, very simple. So, my main message for you today, do I like the Starch to Veggie ratio? Yes. Do I think it's deeply flawed? I absolutely do. I think you need to use it very, very carefully. And I think if you're at the intermediate stage with this stuff or beyond, I think it's not for you. I don't think it's worth paying that much attention to. My main message today, as I say, there are more options out there for you to break through plateaus. Don't just rely on this simple model. What I'd like you to do right now, if you are struggling with losing some weight here, you are struggling to break through plateaus, is check out the video linked in the description box down below. I do have a full live stream here, live stream talk on how to break through plateaus on a vegan or plant-based diet. I share a couple of pieces of advice there, a couple of strategies that you can do to get the needle moving. I really hope that helps. If you're looking to lose your first 20 pounds as a vegan or a plant-based dieter in the next 90 days, check out ryandoescoaching.com. Again, I'll link this down below, ryandoescoaching.com, where you can learn more and apply for my one-on-one coaching program. Speak soon.